Are you looking for a podcast that contains bizarre theories, strange facts, and some out-of-this-world opinions? Then this podcast is for you. Listener discretion is advised, especially if you trust the government.
Conspirashy.
Welcome back, conspiracy lovers, to another episode of Conspirashy, the show where no story is too strange, no theory too far-fetched, and no one is safe from our deep dives into the unknown. I'm Ash, your host, your guide into the world of conspiracies, and occasional devil's advocate. If you're new around here, welcome to the rabbit hole. Just a reminder, we drop new episodes every Wednesday, and if you love bizarre theories and out-of-this-world conspiracies, make sure to subscribe and leave a positive review. Seriously, it helps me fight off the algorithm overlords. So today we're doing something a little different because we're exploring a full-blown cult, which isn't a conspiracy per se, but it does have a lot of mysteries surrounding it and some super interesting talking points. So in today's episode, we're opening the gates of heaven. Well, not quite. We're diving into Heaven's Gate, the deadly UFO cult. Possibly one of the weirdest, most unsettling cults of all time. So pour yourself a drink, grab a snack, but maybe steer clear of applesauce and vodka, yeah? And if you didn't catch that reference, it will become clear later on, don't worry. Now you might be thinking, Ash, I've heard of these guys, bunch of loonies in matching tracksuits, waiting for aliens to beam them up. And yeah, you'd be about right, but there's so much more to this story. This is a tale of spaceships, castration, yeah, you heard that right, and an ending so bizarre, it'll make your tinfoil hat spin. So buckle up, because today we're diving into the deep, dark, and downright strange world of Heaven's Gate, the cult that believed a UFO was hiding behind a comet, and unfortunately, they didn't just believe it, they acted on it. Right, let's set the stage. So the year is 1975, bell-bottoms are in, disco is terrorizing the airwaves, and somewhere in the US, a bloke named Marshall Applewhite is having what can only be described as the world's weirdest midlife crisis. So Marshall, aka Doe, yeah, like Doe a deer, but without the deer, teams up with a woman named Bonnie Nettles, aka T. These two believe they are higher beings sent to Earth on a mission from outer space, and naturally the only logical thing to do is start a cult. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's rewind a bit, because these two didn't just wake up one day and decide to be intergalactic messiahs. So Marshall Applewhite, born in Texas in 1931, had what you might call a series of unfortunate events before he became the wide-eyed leader of a UFO death cult. He was a preacher's son, a trained musician, and fun fact, he briefly tried to make it on Broadway. Spoiler, he didn't. Instead, he bounced around as a music teacher and a choir director, all while struggling with his sexuality in a deeply conservative time. This, combined with a messy divorce and losing his job over an affair with a male student, sent him spiraling into a psychiatric hospital. Before he was leading people to next level, trademark, he was having a full-blown meltdown. In the early 70s, he landed himself in a psych ward, reportedly hearing voices and convinced he was on some kind of divine mission. Aren't they all? It was there that he started believing he was chosen for something bigger, something beyond this world. And here's where it gets extra weird. Initially, his teachings were less sci-fi and more Christian, right? Heaven's Gate started as a bizarre take on Christianity, blending traditional end-times prophecies with a cosmic twist. Over time, it evolved into a full-blown UFO religion, but at its core, it was always about salvation, just, with a spaceship instead of Jesus on a cloud. Next up, we have Bonnie Nettles, a nurse with a thing for astrology, seances, and apparently dragging unsuspecting men into apocalyptic sci-fi fantasies. She met Applewhite in 1972, and from the moment their eyes met, they decided they were destined for something big. Not a business venture, by the way, or a band. No, they were the two chosen ones sent to prepare humanity for ascension into a higher realm. The ancient astronaut theory, angels are actually aliens, that was their jam. They believed Jesus himself was just another extraterrestrial being trying to enlighten humanity. Now, when most people hit a rough patch in life, they go on a road trip, maybe start a blog. But these two, they just abandoned their families and they changed their names to Bo and Peep, which is either a cute nursery rhyme or a weird power move for two people leading a doomsday cult. So Bo and Peep hit the road, trying to recruit lost souls into their cosmic classroom. Their pitch: we are the two witnesses from the Book of Revelation. The world is about to be recycled, and only we know the way out. Classic cult. Like, this is how they all go, honestly. But you know what? It worked. That's the funny part. It actually worked. So by 1975, they had amassed a following of nearly 100 people who gave up their families, their identities, and all their earthly possessions to follow these two on a path to supposed enlightenment. And if you're wondering what enlightenment looked like, it wasn't pretty. No sex, no individuality, matching uniforms, basically a highly restricted boarding school, but somehow even worse. Plus a belief that their bodies were just vehicles, in quotation marks, for their higher selves. So how does a couple of New Age nutters go from weird sci-fi lectures to a mass suicide that shocked the world? Let's take a look. So before we go calling Heaven's Gate the weirdest thing to ever happen, let's zoom out for a second and take a look at the world they emerged from. Because honestly, the 70s and 80s were prime real estate for UFO cults, New Age followers, and doomsday prophets, all the good stuff. So let's start with the 70s. America was in a weird place, right? Vietnam had left people disillusioned. Watergate had everyone questioning authority. And disco, well, it was a crime in itself, but people were looking for answers. And when they didn't find them in traditional religion, they turned to whatever else was available. Eastern mysticism, psychedelics, self-help gurus, and of course, little green men. So this was the golden age of the age of Aquarius, where people believed we were on the verge of a massive spiritual awakening. That's why cults like the Manson family, the People's Temple, Jonestown, and the Children of God were just popping up everywhere. Heaven's Gate wasn't the only UFO cult either. There was Unarius, the Raelians, and the Aetherius Society, right? All promising salvation via ET phone home extraterrestrials, right? People were just ditching their jobs left, right, and center to follow the light, which, if you think about it, is just the 1970s version of selling everything to live in a van and blog about your spirituality. All right, come on. And then let's talk about the 80s and 90s. If the 70s were all about free love and ascension, the next 2 decades were all about fear and paranoia. So you had like the Cold War, government conspiracies, and the rise of the internet meant people were consuming more paranoia fuel than ever before, right? So X-Files was on TV convincing everyone that the government was hiding aliens. You also had like people hearing about Roswell and all the rest of the good stuff. And Art Bell's Coast to Coast AM radio show had people believing that shadowy figures were watching them from the skies. And actually, speaking of the paranoia stuff, right? And how that connects to cults, this was also the time period when, Wacko and the Branch Davidians happened, right? We'll definitely cover them in a future episode if you like this format, talking about cults. And then you also had the Oklahoma City bombing, right? So suddenly cults weren't just seen as oddballs anymore. They were actually started to be seen as dangerous. And this fueled the way Heaven's Gate operated completely. They saw themselves as the last enlightened souls in a world doomed to destruction. So they isolated themselves, controlled every aspect of their members' lives, and waited for the ultimate escape. And now let's go on a little bit of a tangent, because I need you to know about the absolute madness that was the 1986 Halley's Comet panic. Okay, so every 60 years, Halley's Comet swings by Earth, looking all majestic and spacey and all the good stuff, right? In 1910, people legit thought the tail of that comet was going to poison the entire planet, right? Scientists assured everyone it wouldn't, but of course, Halley's Comet had people so freaked out they were buying anti-comet pills and oxygen elixirs to protect themselves from the deadly space gas, which is basically the 1900s version of buying crystals to fix your Wi-Fi. I mean, come on. And it happened again in 1986. People were so convinced that Halley's Comet was a harbinger of doom that survivalists started stocking up on supplies and cults popped up claiming it was a sign from beyond. Sound familiar? Now, swap all this comet for Hale-Bopp, throw in the rise of the internet, and you've got Heaven's Gate in a nutshell. Applewhite saw what he thought was a UFO trailing behind the comet, and that was all he needed to convince himself and his followers that it was their ride to the afterlife. So, why did Heaven's Gate happen? Because people were primed for it. The cultural landscape, the paranoia, the obsession with aliens, and the apocalypse, it all came together in the perfect storm of weird. And in that storm, Applewhite found the perfect audience. People searching for meaning in a world that felt more chaotic by the day. And if you think we've moved past that thing, well, I've got some modern day conspiracy theories to tell you, but that's for another episode coming soon. Now, if you're wondering how the hell did anyone actually join this cult? Honestly, fair question. But here's the thing. Back in the 70s and 80s, as I mentioned, cults were just popping up everywhere. And, you know, they were kind of like dodgy pyramid schemes, I guess, everywhere and weirdly effective at sucking people in. So Heaven's Gate wasn't just some random street corner preacher operation. They infiltrated New Age communities, hosted seminars, and made it seem like they weren't a cult at all. Classic. Just a group of enlightened individuals who had answers no one else did. Sounds like a cult. They used posters asking, "Do you believe in UFOs?" and position themselves as offering divine knowledge that mixed sci-fi with biblical prophecy. And for the spirituality curious, that was catnip. And, you know, at their peak, they had about 80 dedicated members, right? Fully dedicated. And when you're a member, once you're in, the rules were absolute. There was no deviating from the rules, right? Step 1, everyone had to change their name to something ending in OD, ODY, right? Because, you know, nothing screams enlightenment like sounding like a rejected Star Wars character. My name is So Doddy, Norse Doddy, beep beep. Step 2, no sex ever. If you thought Catholic guilt was bad, these guys took it to another planet. Also, no relationships, right? So in fact, anything that made you feel remotely human was seen as a distraction. Your body, just a temporary vehicle that needed to be discarded. And to drive that point home, some members, including Applewhite himself, underwent castration to remove sexual temptation entirely. Yep, they went to Mexico to get it done because, shocker, most American doctors were not on board with snipping off bits in the name of Space Jesus. Daily life was strict, every movement was planned, they ate the same meals, wore the same clothes, and even spoke in a weird robotic way to strip away emotion. They weren't just trying to live a higher existence, they were actively erasing what made them human. And let's talk about money as well, because a lot of cults out there kind of, you know, they take all your money. They get you to sell your house, they get you to empty your bank accounts, and it all goes into the name of the cult and Jesus and whatever else they're worshipping, right? But Heaven's Gate wasn't about scamming people of cash at all. Members actually pooled their resources willingly and actually became self-sufficient by offering tech services. Yeah, literally. They ran a web design business in the 90s. Imagine logging into your GeoCities page and finding out it was made by a literal UFO death cult. And what makes Heaven's Gate truly unique is how they embraced the internet long before cults even knew what a computer was. They were ahead of the curve. They were like, yeah, this is going to be a big thing. Let's get on board. So while other groups relied on in-person seminars and handwritten pamphlets and all that stuff, Heaven's Gate had a fully functional website in the mid-90s. It was complete with FAQs, doctoring explanations, and even recruitment materials. So in a way, they were the first viral online cult. And today, the internet is the perfect breeding ground for modern-day conspiracy movements. If Heaven's Gate had access to YouTube, TikTok, and Discord, who knows how many more people they could have pulled in, right? Instead of seminars in rented hotel rooms, they'd be running webinars and selling UFO salvation courses for crypto, for sure. But despite the structure, people left. Heaven's Gate wasn't a physical prison, but it was a mental one. And while many recruits ran away in the early years, those who stayed became completely dependent on Applewhite. And as his paranoia grew, so did the group's obsession with their eventual escape from Earth. All right, so before we get into the final act and how they feel like they can ascend, let's actually get a bit technical and put our shrink hats on, right? So let's explore how people actually fall for this stuff from a psychological point of view, because I think that's just really interesting to understand. So how does a seemingly normal person go from casual curiosity to believing their only way off this rock is by hitching a ride on a UFO hiding behind a comet? I mean, it sounds crazy. So how does it work, right? The answer is brainwashing, but not in the way that you immediately think, right? When people hear brainwashing, they imagine some bloke strapped to a chair while some dark figures flash hypnotic spirals in their face. But real indoctrination is way less sci-fi and way more death by 1,000 tiny cuts, right? The process starts with isolation. Once you cut people off from their friends, family, and anything that could challenge the group's beliefs, they lose their sense of comparison to their real world, right? Heaven's Gate wasn't unique in this. The Manson family did it, Jonestown did it, even multi-level marketing schemes do it to some sense, though at least with them, you only lose your savings, not your life. And then love bombing hits fast. 1 minute, you're just a curious guest. The next, you're surrounded by people treating you like you're the chosen one. So, yeah, the way I can explain it is that, have you ever signed up for a gym and suddenly you become mates with the trainer, right? Now imagine that, but instead of fitness goals, they're promising you a seat on a spaceship. So you feel special, right? You get like a little bit, bit special treatment. Yeah, you got some words of encouragement. Someone's pushing you along. That's essentially what is happening in these cults to drive people in one direction. And then you got to look at things like thought reform. So Heaven's Gate members didn't just believe in UFOs; they had their entire identities rewritten. They abandoned their birth names for bizarre ones ending in ODY. There was ones called Rakodi, Lavodi, all this. They all changed their names. That was a massive rule. They wore identical outfits, and they spoke in this robotic tone. So that's just all ways to remove their personal identities. All of that to become unrecognizable as an individual and one with the group, which then drives us into cognitive dissonance. People invest time, money, and their entire lives and their identities into something. So admitting that something is wrong later down the line, it becomes nearly impossible for them, because what else do you have now? Where do you go from here? You're so warped into this one way of thinking that you either don't see what's wrong with this, or you cannot physically accept that something's wrong because you have nothing else. Like, if someone gives up their family, their belongings, and in some cases their literal genitals, they're not about to be like, oh, my bad, like, okay, I'm gonna go back to my normal life, like it was a phase. Like, no, they're gonna double down on it, aren't they? It's the same reason why people defend, I don't know, like a terrible TV show just because they sat through 4 seasons of the shit. I mean, it is, just gonna be like, oh, okay, yeah, I hate this show now, because you've literally dedicated years of your life to watching seasons and seasons of something. So, yeah, I mean, just look at the finale of Dexter. I mean, yeah. But Heaven's Gate also had an extra layer of control. There was the fear of the outside world. So we also see this a lot when you dive into cults, right? So they start to build this community within their walls or within their space that they operate in. And then it's kind of like, we are going to be attacked from the outside, so we must defend the inside, right? And we see that a lot. And Applewhite convinced his followers that society was corrupt, doomed, and full of Luciferians, trying to keep them trapped on Earth, right? So this us versus them mentality, it literally is cult indoctrination 101. Like, every cult does this shit. So once the outside world becomes the enemy, there's nowhere left to run anymore. And it wasn't just dumb, gullible people who fell for this. Well, maybe afterwards you can kind of like, okay, maybe they were dumb and gullible, but in the time, they didn't seem like it was always dumb and gullible people. Cult members included engineers, computer programmers, and well-educated professionals. Where the education came from is another story, but I mean, it is America, but sorry, guys. But intelligence doesn't make you immune to manipulation. If anything, smart people are really good at rationalizing their own bad decisions. So, was it mind control? Not in the sci-fi sense, but a slow, methodical, psychological breakdown? Absolutely. And you know what? It's still happening today. Look at extremist groups, social media echo chambers, or even shady self-help seminars. I mean, yeah, I'm looking at you, NXIVM. Literally. So the tools Applewhite used to build Heaven's Gate, they're still out there. They're still functional. They're still happening today. It's just wrapped in different packaging. And all of that combined is how you convince a group of grown adults that their destiny lies on a spaceship no one else can see. So, let's get into the final act of Heaven's Gate. We need to fast forward to 1997. Applewhite, now fully in control, is convinced that the group's time on Earth is up. The signs are everywhere. You've got government conspiracies, society's moral decay, and most importantly, the arrival of comet Hale-Bopp. This isn't just any comet. As I've already mentioned, Applewhite becomes convinced that behind this comet is a spaceship. A spaceship meant to take them to the next level, trademark. The only problem, they can't board the UFO as humans. They have to leave their earthly containers first. So the group begins preparing for their exit with military-like precision. They record farewell messages, calmly explaining that this is a moment of joy, not tragedy. They are simply graduating, leaving behind their human vehicles to ascend to their rightful place in the kingdom of heaven. Ah! Now, one of the strange things about Heaven's Gate is that idea of exiting their vehicles, right? Not many other cults think about it this particular way. So, and they're not talking, and when I say vehicles, if you haven't clocked on, which I'm sure you have, but it's not cars or anything like that. It's their bodies. They claim that their bodies are vehicles, right? And they truly believed that the human form was just a temporary shell, a lowly vessel holding back their true potential. So this is why their final act wasn't considered a suicide to them. It was like a graduation, a release from their earthly prisons. They even had a ritualistic structure to their deaths, ensuring that they left their vehicles in the neatest way possible. And if you need further proof of their meticulous nature, let's take a closer look at March 22nd, 1997, the day the suicides begin. And they are as meticulously planned as their entire existence, might I add. So, over 3 days, they take barbiturates, which are a category of sedative hypnotic medications, basically puts you to sleep, puts you in like a trance-like state. And they wash them down with vodka and applesauce. Interesting mix, kind of like what I would have drank at uni when I was broke as fuck. Like, literally, like, I remember one time we were at uni and it was like we all got into the kitchen together. There was about 8 of us in the kitchen and we're all emptying our pockets trying to scrape any money together. Literally pound coins, 50p coins, all on the table. And we're like, okay. So amongst 8 of us, I think, and it was a Friday or something. Maybe it was even a Tuesday, I don't know. But we all wanted to go out anyway. It's university, come on. And we're all in the kitchen and everyone emptied their pockets. And we were like, yeah, we got about £8 between 8 of us, like a pound each. So it was like, what should we do? Should we buy food or alcohol? So obviously the resounding answer was alcohol. I mean, so we all went to, I don't know if it was like Sainsbury's or I don't know, a supermarket, and we bought literally the cheapest bottle of vodka we could find, and I think we just bought like squash, like cordial, basically, the cheapest one, and we literally mixed vodka with with cordial with squash. But anyway, it was a great night. I think we don't remember much of it, so it must have worked. Oh man, yeah, so many nights like that. Shout out to the uni crew if you're listening. Anyway, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, so they washed it down with vodka and apple sauce. And remember when I joked about avoiding applesauce and vodka at the start? Well, it turns out that was the official Heaven's Gate tasting menu. So they swigged this cocktail, a vodka apple sedatini, if you will, and they carefully arranged themselves in bunk beds like it's some kind of cosmic Airbnb reservation. I wouldn't be surprised if it would be on one of them new Airbnb experience houses that they keep pushing for like £700 a night or some shit. One night stay in the UFO cult Airbnb hostel. Vodka and apple sauce upon arrival. £700 a night. How do they get off charge on these prices? I mean, come on. Anyways, once they've taken their sedatini, they get into their bunk beds, lie straight, very perfectly. And then they methodically place plastic bags over their heads to speed up asphyxiation. One group goes, the next tidies up, bags are removed, faces covered with purple cloths, straighten their shoes because apparently even in death, presentation matters. And so it continues until only 2 are left alive. They cover each other and they put the bags over their own heads, but there's no one left to adjust them in the end or remove their bags after asphyxiation. And that was the end of their ascension, right? That's how it was left. And let's not forget, though, one of the eeriest parts of their final days, the farewell tapes. Now, this is really, really eerie, honestly. And if you just give them a quick Google, you can find some of these tapes. And let me tell you, it's very, very unsettling. But let me explain. So before they take their exit, members of Heaven's Gate recorded video messages calmly explaining why they were about to leave their human vehicles. In these tapes, they don't sound panicked or fearful. They sound excited, like people about to embark on a trip. Like they are, you know, that feeling that you get when you're like sitting on the plane and you're like, oh, it's actually happening. Literally, that's how they're acting. Some members are smiling. They're reassuring the viewers that they're at peace, while Applewhite in his signature wide-eyed intensity, which, by the way, his eyes, oh my days. Yeah, just Google this guy. It's like he's always got them open, like full stretch. He speaks of that departure as like a joyous event, right? Here's some direct quotes from Applewhite, right? We're happily preparing to leave this world and go to the next level, trademark. We're about to return to whence we came. This is not a troubling circumstance. I promise you that those who leave this world in this manner will be joyous. We know who we are. We know what we have to do. I can hardly wait. I'm very excited. Mental, right? And then some of the Heaven's Gate members, these are some of the quotes, right? We're all happy to be doing what we're doing. 39 of us are going home. It's the happiest day of my life. We're looking forward to this. It's not suicide. It's graduation. It's so weird. It's so weird. It's almost surreal, right? Watching people so convinced that they were about to board an invisible spaceship. Maybe they were. I don't know. Maybe they were. Maybe they just knew something that we don't know. But it's mental. They were so convinced. Like, even though we dived into the psychological elements and the way that this cult operated to brainwash everyone, it still seems a bit too far-fetched to give your life for it. Like, it's mental. So maybe they did know something, right? I don't know. But if you go and watch these tapes, like I mentioned, they're still floating around. So it is a chilling glimpse into the mindset of people who truly believed they were escaping Earth. So after the 3-day suicide, when the police arrive at the mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California, they were met with an eerie silence. Inside, they found rows of bunk beds holding lifeless bodies, all dressed identically, black tracksuits, brand new Nike Decade sneakers, and an armband that reads, Heaven's Gate Away Team. Each member has a $5 bill and 3 quarters in the pocket. Intergalactic toll money, I guess. I don't know. I just love the fact that they all wore the same black Nike Decades. Like, I just love the fact that they were all in the same pair of trainers, the same outfit, because, you know, even cults, they need a dress code. I mean, come on. And even in mass suicide, you got to coordinate your outfits. You don't want to look like shit. So, yeah, that is so funny. But, well, it's not funny because they're all dead, but, you know, it is what it is. They signed up for it. But here's where it gets even weirder, because as I mentioned before, they were kind of like on the internet before internet was like cool or whatever. So they didn't just leave their bodies behind to be discovered, right? They left a website. Even in death, Heaven's Gate was ahead of the digital curve. And let's talk about the Heaven's Gate website just for a moment, actually, because amidst all the chaos, someone noticed it was still online, and as I mentioned, it still is today. Decades later, the original Heaven's Gate website is still up. Right, you can literally go and have a look at it. And the best part, it's still being maintained by 2 surviving members who still believe in the teachings of Doe and T, keeping the faith alive on what looks like a time capsule from the early internet. Honestly, it's worth a visit if you want to see a relic of the strangest sci-fi cult in history. You should definitely go and check it out. These guys didn't just stay loyal, they literally became customer support for a doomsday UFO cult. Imagine calling IT and hearing, "Hello, thank you for contacting Heaven's Gate. Your call is very important to us. Just not as important as ascending to the next level." Trademark. We literally live in the weirdest timeline ever. What the fuck? Well, even after the tragedy, some former members still believed. Some even followed suit, taking their own lives in the years that followed, hoping to reunite with their fellow travelers aboard the spaceship Applewhite had promised. I know it's supposed to be the other side of the comet that's passing by Earth right now, but 4 years has passed. So if I do it now, I'm not that far behind. Maybe they have to take a stop at a petrol station, and I can catch up to them. If I get a run on now in my Nike Decades, if I start running, I'll catch up to them. Like, what is the mentality of these people? I swear down. And let's talk about when the news of Heaven's Gate broke, right? It wasn't just, a tragedy. It was a media circus. I mean, how could it not be? This is TV gold. So, March 1997, you turn on your TV expecting a standard dose of the bad 90s fashion and Seinfeld reruns, but instead, you're hit with breaking news of a mass suicide, complete with the matching outfits, a UFO prophecy, and the creepiest goodbye videos you've ever seen. So, you can imagine the media went wild. Reporters swarmed the Heaven's Gate mansion, describing the eerie, pristine house filled with bunk beds and the purple shrouds. So news anchors, barely hiding their morbid fascination, kept rolling the same eerie footage on a loop. 39 identical corpses, Nike's worst product placement in history, their faces covered, their pockets stuffed with cash and change. If the phrase cult aesthetic wasn't a thing before, Heaven's Gate made it one. And the headlines, peak 90s sensationalism. Check these out. Cult of the Comet. Catchy. Rolls off the tongue. I love the 90s. UFO death cult takes the ultimate leap. Bit dramatic, but alright. Nike sneakers and a ticket to space. Which I'm sure Nike's PR team just loved that one. So some media outlets treated it as a genuine tragedy, but others, it was pure mockery. Late night hosts had a field day. Comedians joked about Applewhite's bug-eyed stare and the fact that a group of grown adults truly believed they were about to be beamed up like it was a deleted scene from Star Trek. Even Saturday Night Live did a skit about it. So imagine losing your life for what you think is divine ascension, only to be turned into a punchline on Letterman. Well, they're not around to see it, are they? And also, the media wasn't just covering the story, it was fueling new conspiracies. So the internet was still, in its infancy, but early conspiracy forums were already running wild. Some people claim that the government knew about the UFO behind Hale-Bopp and covered it up. Others insisted Heaven's Gate didn't actually die, that they had exited in their truest sense and were out there aboard the ship. I mean, who knows? But I think, spoiler, they were all just definitely dead. But, maybe they, like I mentioned, maybe they had something we didn't. Nothing's too weird on Conspirashy. Meanwhile, the families of the victims were, devastated. Many of them had no idea their loved ones were still involved with Heaven's Gate until they saw their names on the news. So some tried to sue. Of course, classic American move, just sue for everything. Claiming Applewhite had brainwashed their relatives. But in the eyes of the law, the members had acted of their own free will, and it was a legal and ethical grey area, one that still sparks debates today about where persuasion ends and coercion begins. But the legacy of Heaven's Gate didn't die with them. Even today, if you dig deep enough on the internet, you'll find people who still believe that Marshall Applewhite was right and that they just didn't make the first cut for the first spaceship and their time will come in the future. Like, guys, just get a hobby. And the Heaven's Gate suicide, it wasn't just an event, it was one of the first major cult events to unfold in real time online. They became a cultural phenomenon, actually like a twisted mix of tragedy, spectacle, and the ultimate what the hell just happened moment of the 90s. And there was a lot of what the hell just happened moments in the 90s, let me tell you. And fast forward, we haven't seen the last of cults like this, because let's be honest, people are still looking for answers, still searching for meaning, and still believing that maybe, just maybe, salvation is out there, maybe even behind the next comet, the one that's got 2.7% chance of hitting Earth in 5 years or something. let's see how that happens. And if another group pops up tomorrow promising a one-way ticket to space, well, the media will be right there, cameras rolling, ready to turn it into the next big spectacle. Right, so what about personal accounts or survivor stories? After all of that, you're probably thinking, well, that's it then, the end of Heaven's Gate, case closed, they're all dead. But cults, much like conspiracy theories, don't just vanish overnight. So let's go back to March 1997 from a different point of view. The world is still adjusting to the internet. Titanic is about to make everyone sob uncontrollably. And one man, Rio D'Angelo, is about to walk into something that makes both of those things look like a light-hearted rom-com. Rio wasn't just any former member, he was the guy who discovered the bodies. So now we're looking at it from his perspective on discovering the bodies. Imagine, just for a second, you're heading over to see your old mates, and instead of a cup of tea and a chat, you walk into 39 lifeless bodies in matching night decades. So he'd received a package in the mail from the group just before the suicides. And inside was the farewell message explaining that they had exited their vehicles to join the spaceship behind Hale-Bopp. Now, most of us would take that as a clear, not my fucking problem. But Rio, he decided to check on them, right? So he arrives at the mansion, finds the bodies, and what does he do? He films it. That's right. So before calling the police, he actually records what essentially is the world's most disturbing home video. And honestly, who can blame him? This is the kind of thing no one would believe unless they saw it. And again, good on him. He filmed it before going to the police or the government. He had some proof, he had some tangible evidence before it was all covered up, right? And get this, Rio didn't reject their beliefs, by the way. Even after seeing the mass suicide firsthand, he still thought they might have been onto something, right? He even said he believed Applewhite had been telling the truth about transcending to a higher level. Rio saw the aftermath, literally walked into a house of corpses, and still thought maybe they made it. So that is some next level cognitive dissonance right there. And at that point, you're not just drinking the Kool-Aid. Don't drink the Kool-Aid. That's the theme song of a cult podcast, which is a great show, by the way. You should check them out. So then after discovering them, he had a hard time moving on from this, right? And he wasn't the only one. After the mass suicide, a handful of former members felt left behind. Literally left behind. Like, they've gone without us. They had left the cult before the final act, and instead of feeling relief, some of them were actually devastated that they missed their chance to graduate. And as I mentioned, some even took their own lives in the following years, hoping to catch up with their Heaven's Gate comrades in the cosmos. And one former member who had managed to leave years before described the cult as the best thing that's ever happened to him. And not in like a, yeah, I got out way. Like in a, those were the best years of my life way. And that's the interesting part about cults for me. Because sometimes even when you escape, part of you still belongs to them. So, in the end, did they make it to the spaceship? Who knows, but probably not. But their legacy, that's still orbiting the internet, drawing in the curious, the lost, and the ever-hopeful believers who still think maybe, just maybe, Applewhite was right all along. So what does Heaven's Gate leave behind? A bizarre footnote in history, a cautionary tale, or something more? So let's dive into the obvious, right? Cults didn't stop with Heaven's Gate. If anything, they just evolved. Now, Heaven's Gate might sound like a one-off brand of madness, but let's be real. History is full of cults that aren't too far off. The Raelians, the Ethereal Society, Scientology, all claim alien salvation in one form or another. Even NXIVM, the self-improvement group, which, surprise, was actually a branding and sex trafficking nightmare. Shock. And QAnon, a decentralized cult where the spaceship is just an internet forum. They all follow the same psychological playbook: isolation, control, and a leader with a god complex. And you know, these cult tactics, they haven't gone away. They haven't just disappeared. They've just been rebranded. These days, instead of bunk beds and tracksuits, you've got influencers peddling spiritual enlightenment for £999 a session, Reddit threads convincing people they have hidden knowledge, and social media echo chambers radicalizing people in ways that would make Marshall Applewhite pretty proud. The need to belong to something bigger, to find meaning in chaos, and to believe in secret knowledge hasn't gone anywhere. If anything, the internet has made it easier than ever to stumble into the rabbit hole. And, you know, I make a podcast about conspiracies because it's interesting to talk about. So, you know, the things that it might have seemed like it happened many years ago, but it's still relevant today, and it's still cycling around in one form or another. And if you think modern day movements aren't following the same pattern of indoctrination, ask yourself, ever seen an online group where people completely cut off opposing views, worship a central figure, and slowly reshape their entire belief system based on community reinforcement? Yeah, we're still in the Heaven's Gate era, honestly, just with better branding and more hashtags. And now the Heaven's Gate story still circulates in memes, YouTube deep dives, and podcasts like this one. They've been referenced in TV shows, music, and even fashion. That infamous Nike Decade shoe, it's not just a morbid relic, it becomes a part of pop culture. You know, Nike actually immediately discontinued the model after the mass suicide, but doesn't stop it from becoming weirdly iconic. Yeah, collectors go nuts to trying to find a pair of these shoes now, because, I mean, of course, the real takeaway from a mass suicide was, yeah, those shoes are kind of sick, and they were. And let's talk about modern UFO cults. So Heaven's Gate wasn't the first, and it won't be the last. But what's fascinating is how it changed the way people talk about UFOs. So before 1997, alien conspiracies were mostly about Roswell, abductions, and shadowy government cover-ups that we've covered in previous episodes. But after Heaven's Gate, suddenly UFOs as salvation became a bigger theme in conspiracy circles, right? Even today, they still exist. So whenever a big UFO event happens, like the recent declassified Pentagon videos or the drones, you know, you'll find people online referencing Heaven's Gate. convinced the next level, trademark, is just around the corner and debating whether they were onto something after all. And here's the real question. Could something like Heaven's Gate happen again? I mean, have you seen the internet? I mean, we're overdue, but so the short answer is absolutely, yeah, it can. Long answer, it probably already has, but instead of a spaceship, they're waiting for Bitcoin to go to the moon. I mean, the ingredients are all still here. Disillusioned people, check. A society drowning in uncertainty, check. Leaders promising hidden knowledge and an escape from it all, check. I mean, the next Heaven's Gate might not be wearing matching trainers and tracking comets, but it will exist because at the end of the day, what Applewhite was selling wasn't just a spaceship ride. It was certainty, belonging, purpose, and people will always be drawn to that, right? So what do we take away from all of this? Well, first, if someone tells you they're an alien in a human body, red flag, but also let's go for a beer. Second, if a group is pushing you to give up all personal identity, belongings, and certain body parts, absolutely not. And finally, if a comet comes around and someone tries to convince you to leave your earthly body behind because of some incoming space taxi, run. And if they're offering anti-comet pills along the way, sprint as fast as you can. So, was it insanity, a perfect storm of manipulation and belief, or just another tragic case of people desperately searching for meaning in a world that offered none? Maybe all of the above, but one thing's for sure, this wasn't just a cult, this was the strangest sci-fi story that turned into real-life horror. And if history has taught us anything, it's that Heaven's Gate won't be the last of its kind. And seriously, cults are fascinating, terrifying, and disturbingly persuasive. Heaven's Gate might be one of the strangest, but history's full of them. And if there's one thing we've learned from this, it's that sometimes reality is way weirder than any conspiracy. So let me know what you think. Did you enjoy diving into a cult today? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. Drop me a line, share your theories, and let's keep the conversation going. Because history is one thing, but conspiracies, that's where things get interesting. You can get in touch on our socials at Conspirashy. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok. You can also email me, conspirashy@gmail.com. I'm always keen to hear what you guys have to say.
Conspirashy. Conspirashy.
That's it for today's episode of Conspirashy, where weird is the new normal. Join us next Wednesday for a brand new conspiracy theory. And if you're planning on joining a UFO cult in the meantime, maybe give me a ring first, yeah? Don't forget to follow, subscribe, and leave us a quick review. It helps us keep unearthing history's biggest mysteries and bringing you the wildest conspiracies. And remember, the truth is out there.